This. Normally, week one would be without your dogs. It would be a PowerPoint presentation where you'd be there in person. But because we're going to be doing this slightly differently in a outside venue on a grass and not in a shed, I decided that we would have all the weeks with the dogs. And so I'd like you to be able to just go through this. It's going to take a bit of time, and I will try to keep it shorter than it normally would. Normally, this would run for an hour. I am going to try and make it a lot less than that. Who we won't be introducing ourselves here. Okay, this is an overview of the 6 weeks, and as you can see there, it's going to be slightly different to this. But now you're going to be looking at the learning process, a little bit about body language, and a little bit about dog behavior. Week 2, that's as going to be week 1, we are going to be doing sit, drop, meeting and greeting. That's meeting and greeting other dogs, which is a very important thing to be able to do with a dog. Jumping up, some people are going to have problems with dogs jumping up. We're going to do hand, touch and drop. We do quite a lot on that first week, so bear with me. We will hopefully, that gives you plenty of stuff to practice. Then we're going to have some themes. We're going to have enrichment. We're also going to be doing some tug, stay, recall, loose lead walking. Then we're going to be doing some husbandry. Don't worry about the term husbandry. We'll come to that, and we're going to be teaching leave it. Then the other weeks we're basically practicing and upskilling on what you are to learn. All right, dog training. Gosh, it's a confusing place, dog training. It's confusing because the different methods that are used by different trainers. But let's look a little bit about history and where dog training has really come from. It's partly craft, it's partly technical, and it's partly science-based. Well, that's now partly science-based. The confusion and the differences come from where it's come from. It really has come from basically post-war periods. During the war, military people trained dogs for help them for military tasks. And when they went back into society after post-war, they were men and they took dog training to the families. But because they were military based, they were using a lot of aversive type of training. And this is where even things that healing, for example, always on your left. This is because you carry your shotgun on your right. We don't need to do that anymore. So you don't need to heel your dogs on your left. You can put your dogs on your right or your left when you're walking. It doesn't matter. But we as humans are resistant to change, and crafts are resistant to change. Cultural things go down from generation to generation, and you will still see a lot of trainers and a lot of people still using outdated methods. My methods are more modern. They are positive reinforcement methods, and they are strongly based in what we know and what research has been telling us about behaviour and training and how we can improve from there. This does not mean to say that we will not be improving from here on. I'm sure what I'm doing now, in 10 years' time, other people will be thinking, oh, no, why she's doing that for? Things improve. So, how are we going to train? How are we going to train your dogs to do stuff? Well, it is a process. It's not a race. You may find that some of your dogs, and some of you may be quicker at doing some things than other things. And some of you might feel that you're getting left behind. It's not a race. It's not about being left behind. It's really about going at your dog's pace, working with your dog to get the behaviors that you want. So what we're going to do is we're going to set them up to try to do the behavior to start with, whether it's a sit, whether it's we're luring into a drop, or whether we're just trying to set the environment up to get the behavior. When we've got that little bit of behavior, we're going to mark it, and then we are going to reinforce it. Now, what I mean by that, we're marking it with a word or a click. This is where clicker training comes in. Now, you don't have to use that clicker. We'll come to that. You can just simply use a verbal marker called just a simple yes. We can just say that word. As the dog does the behavior that you want, yes, then you reinforce. Now, reinforcement is a complicated thing as well. We are going to, on a whole, use food to reinforce, but it is more broader than that. So is it that easy? Well, it can be, but sometimes not. As I say, what do we mean by reinforcement? Reinforcement by technical definition is the increasing of a behavior. If a behavior is reinforced, it does increase by definition. So what can we use for reinforcement? Most animals like to eat because they need to survive. It's a very, very basic form of reinforcement because we don't need to be taught that eating is good. We generally know eating is good. So we can generally use food as a reinforcement. But even then, you need to still work out what your dog actually likes in the way of food. We can use dry biscuits, not very high value. So if we increase that value to maybe some meaty kind of stuff or cheesy stuff, then something that your dog really likes, then that is going to be far more reinforcing to your dog, and your dog is more likely to do that behavior that you just taught him a second ago, and it's more likely to repeat it again and again and again, thinking that it's going to get that piece of reinforcement again. But let's just a sideline on reinforcement. We're going to give reinforcement, as in we are going to use positive reinforcement to actually give it at the time of their behavior. Reinforcement can actually be all around because it can be other things. So let's look at this scenario of the postman. So suburban street, postman coming along. He's delivering the mail. He goes from house to house, letterbox to letterbox, and dogs are sometimes in the yard. So what often will happen, postman's walking down, dogs will start to bark because the postman is approaching their property. Bark, 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 bark. Postman delivers the mail and the postman walks on, and the barking generally then settles down and stops. Dog thinks, great, did that. I did a really good job. I kept that postman away. And so that dog has been reinforced by that behavior. That behavior has been reinforced by the fact the postman left. The dog did his job. That is exactly what the dog wanted to happen. Get rid of the postman. Postman did go because of course he had to go, not because the dog barked at him. But the dog doesn't know that. So some postmen do click onto that very, very quickly and start taking treats with them and actually throw treats into the yard. As they approach, dog gobbles up the treat, no barking, and the dog starts to then predict, postman's coming, my treat's going to be coming. Hey presto, no barking. But that's just one sideline to reinforcement. History has a big importance of reinforcement as well. So we need to have what we call a reinforcement history. If a behavior has got a history of being reinforced, then it's more likely to be happening. So, move on. Now, clickers you're not going to have because you haven't come to class yet. I will be bringing them down next week and you will all get a clicker. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. Sometimes it can be cumbersome because you've got your clicker in your hand, you've got your treats, you've got your dog lead, and some people just don't get on with clickers. Fine, don't use it. Just use the word click. Yes, it needs to be short, sharp. Yes. So we won't be doing a demonstration with Shadow, by the way. Okay, so once we have a behavior, so we have started to get that behavior, we have started to reward it, the behavior is now happening. This is maybe a few weeks into class, or you may already have some behaviors that you've been practicing at home. We need to then start to do what we call the 3Ds. That is, we want to practice distance, duration, and distance, duration, and distraction. Sorry, I forgot the other D. Distraction is just that, distraction. Distraction of other dogs, distraction of children, distraction of noises, distraction of weather, can be all sorts of distractions. Distance, as exactly as it says, distance from the dog or distance from different things, and duration of a behavior, that is the length of the behavior that we're expecting. Generalize. We need to generalize the behaviors. You're going to teach the behaviors in class and we're going to be doing it on a grassy venue. We're going to be doing it outside, but you need to be then thinking about practicing those behaviors in multiple areas, different rooms, different locations. So then over time, what can happen is that people stop reinforcing behaviours. The recall. Now, a lot of you will probably be wanting that as a very, very important part of your training, is we want dogs to come when they're called. And now let's think of this scenario. You've got a puppy. Puppies generally come when they're called. They just do it naturally. They want to. Well, all you've got to do is say pop, 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 and puppy will come to you for sure. So now let's take that. Zooming along 6 months. Now it's getting almost fully grown, not really, but maybe 6 months, 9 months, kind of fully grown. You call the dog. You don't always reinforce it. You barely even say good dog. You're just expecting it to happen. Yeah, okay, we can expect it to happen, but there's a lot of competing reinforcements out there, so we can't actually expect things to happen necessarily. And so the dogs had no reinforcement for that behaviour for maybe a couple of 3 months, even longer by now. So they kind of stopped coming all the time. Now you start to get a little bit cross because, dog's not come, you called come, and they haven't come. And then when they do come along, no, maybe you've not told them off. Maybe you just stood there thinking, oh, well, that took your time, didn't it? Dog looks at your face. He looks at your face. Your face is saying disappointment. Dogs read faces very well. They read bodies very well. Your body and your face is saying disappointment. Dogs don't like to see that on our faces. Therefore, it's almost punishing to your dogs. To some, particularly punishing. To others, well, they're not so sensitive. You know your dogs. So therefore, that behaviour starts to go downhill very rapidly. So all behaviours need to be maintained. We need to give them reinforcement at some points over the period of time forever. So whether the reinforcement is a pat, whether the reinforcement is food, whether it's a game, but it needs some reinforcement at times. So moving on, let's now this is the theory of learning. So there are two basic forms of learning: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is, however, around us all the time. We're going to use operant conditioning to train our dogs. However, we do need to mention classical conditioning. This is what you're going to be doing with those clickers or the word yes, simply because those are going to be classically conditioned to mean food is coming, just like Pavlov's bell. Pavlov rang his bell and then he gave the dogs food. He did this quite a few times. And then he would ring his bell and he would start to measure the dog's salivation because they knew the food was coming and they had an autonomic response of the body is to produce saliva when you know food is coming. So that is what we call classical conditioning. It's a bodily response to something. Now, he did it to a bell. We're going to do clickers or the word yes. When you do that click or when you say that yes, you follow that up with food. Guaranteed. Almost every time. Okay, you might forget once or twice. But on a whole, it's a promise between you and your dog. You're going to feed them. If you maintain that, they will know that when that happens, they're going to get food. They start to predict that. They get excited. They know its food is coming. So it's very powerful. So, but to actually use operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is basically developed by a guy called Skinner. Now, you don't really need to know the history of Skinner. However, it's basically the animal has control over what they're doing. And then if they do something and then they get followed up with reinforcement, that behavior increases. We know that. This is operant conditioning and it is very powerful stuff. So there's a bit more in your reading notes. So I think to make this short, I would like you to read the notes. But if ever you've seen the episode of Big Bang Theory, you can do this on humans too. It's not exclusive to dogs. Operant conditioning is animal, whether it's human, rat, dog, or even an insect like a spider. It's all operant conditioning. So Sheldon did this on his flatmate's girlfriend using chocolates as the reinforcement for her behaviours when they were more in tune with what he wanted them to be. It's quite a funny. Behaviour economics. Now this is just worth going through because animals don't do things randomly. They do behaviours for something. Most behaviour is to either access something or to avoid something. So animals change behavior, as I say, to get reinforcement or to avoid punishment. And the punishment doesn't have to be from you, but natural things can also be punishing. Let's face it, if you're a prey animal and you're out in the wild, it's pretty punishing if you get eaten. So there can be other forms of punishment around. But behavior is usually a choice. Now, sometimes it's a choice in the fact of survival, but it is always a choice. Now, your dog not choosing to come to you, well, he's probably out there thinking, hey, it's much, much more reinforcing being out here. There's smells, there's kangaroo smells, there's even kangaroo poo, and maybe there's even a kangaroo to go and chase. Who knows what it is you're competing with? But if you're competing with something that's pretty hard, then you calling your dog, he's probably going to basically give you the finger and say, no, I prefer to chase the kangaroo, thank you. I will go and do that. So we have to try and align those choices with what we want them to make, only putting them in situations that we know that we can almost predict the outcome. So if an animal does not change its behavior, then it does not perceive the stimulus as reinforcing or punishing. Basically, that means that behavior does change. It increases if it's perceived as being reinforcing. It will decrease if it's perceived as being punishing. So let's just go a little briefly into the ABCs of behavior. As I say, behavior does not just happen randomly. Behavior usually happens in the middle there. What happens before behavior is an antecedent, and what happens after behavior is a consequence. So, as I said before, it's the reinforcement, the consequence, the reinforcement that determines the behavior. Whether it's going to increase if it's a reinforcement, if it's going to be a punishment, it's going to be decreasing. So we have power over this equation. We can change. Usually what we aim at changing is either the A part or the C part. We can change the consequence. We can make the consequence either punishing or we can make the consequence reinforcing, rewarding. We can change the antecedent. We could perhaps get rid of something. If we manage behaviors, we usually manipulate the environment or we manipulate something that's going on to stop the animal being able to do that behavior. That's part of what we call an antecedent environmental setup. So we can change things, antecedent arrangement. So an antecedent, let's look at what we're doing in training. We're going to get our dogs to sit on the word sit, and usually a hand signal as well, because dogs are very body orientated. They look at our bodies and what we're actually telling them with our bodies. So we then show them the hand signal for sit. We tell them to sit. Now, if their behavior then is followed with that sit, great, that's what we want. We're going to follow that with a reward. That's the consequence. And that behavior of sitting, when I tell you to sit or when I say sit, you are going to then more likely do it next time. So that is basically the ABCs. And that's how, if I get behavioral consults where I go in to help people with difficult behaviors, that I'm really looking at. I'm really looking at what is causing that behavior, what stimulus is causing that behavior, what the behavior is, and what is driving that behavior. What is maintaining that behavior? There has to be some reinforcement for that behavior to be maintained. So then we can either get rid of that or we can change it. So that's all we see. So to recap a little bit, we are training our dogs and we're going to be using rewards. We're going to be using treats because that's quick, it's efficient. It's what we can do at a training venue. You can use balls and tug toys, and we will talk a little bit about that in training. But you can imagine if we're going to be using a ball, we'd have balls flying everywhere and dogs would be going crazy. Just not possible in a class situation. It doesn't mean to say you can't do that at home. Of course you can. If your dog finds ball throw reinforcing, then you can use that. In class, however, let's look at those treats. We want them small. We don't want to fill our dogs up, especially if you've got a small dog. They need to be small in comparison to your dog. They need to be somewhat smelly, not necessarily fish. I'm not saying you've all got to bring fish for your dogs, but they've got to be somewhat reinforcing to your dogs because and often smelly things are. They need to be special. Maybe reserve what your dog really likes for your training. So that's what I mean by special. So yeah, dogs don't speak English. Unfortunately, dogs don't speak English. We wish they did. We wish they could read a book and come to us ready trained, but they don't, of course. Body language is extremely important with dogs. They watch us avidly. They know our routines, don't they? They know what shoes we put on. They know when we are going out. They know when we're expected home. They know when we go to certain cupboards to get food out. They know all sorts of things about us and our routines. Do we really know them that well? Do we read their bodies that well? A lot of the time we don't, unfortunately, but we do need to start to look a little bit more in detail about what they are saying to us. And particularly for class, you're reading your dog. You're also looking at the other dogs in class, especially if you're going to be getting close to a dog with your dog. You need to be reading whether that dog actually wants your dog to come close to them or not. So, pictures. This is not so much pictures of the dog's body language. This is just it's a continuum. So we're starting off low down with some of the body language like yawning, blinking, and then at the very top we have got biting. Bites don't just happen. Bites build up. The dogs tell us that they are going to bite us way, way, way before they are really going to do it. However, sometimes we actually take a few things out of that ladder. We take a few runs out. So they they skip from 1 to the maybe 5 up. So we have to be aware of that. And because we don't read dog very well, we're not picking up on those early signs. So if we do pick up on those early signs that our dogs are stressed and their stress is getting worse, and by this time they're getting way up that ladder and now they're looking quite stiff and they're staring at us. They might be giving us what we call a whale eye. We can see the whites of their eyes. Yeah, he's not far from biting you. I would be not advancing on that dog. In fact, I would be rather calm, trying to look away, look down, and move backwards away from that dog. They start to growl, snap, and then they finally bite. So, this is just a few pictures here of normal dog on the left and a very fearful dog on the right. You can see the tail is tucked, ears are back, paws are probably panting. Sorry, he's probably panting, the paws are probably sweating, if you could see. His eyes are probably dilated, could even have the hairs up on his back. We call that piloerection or hackles in common language. So those are the two major differences between those two dogs. A dog really should have its weight on all 4 paws quite evenly. Leaning forward is a fairly aggressive, leaning backwards is fairly submissive, and lying down, rolling over is definitely submissive. But look, if a dog is going that far, that's too far. If your dogs come down to training and normally they eat the treats that you have been trying them with and they won't eat their treats, they are more than likely stressed. Doesn't mean they're going to be stressed for the entire few weeks that we're going to be training for. I hope that they will come round. I will be helping you monitoring your dogs as we go along. I'll be pointing out body language as we go along. This is lip licking. When a dog licks its lips, now assuming you haven't just given it a peanut butter sandwich, then this is a form of low level stress. So watching out for things like that. When they are yawning or panting. Now in the summertime our dogs pant a lot, of course, so everything is in context. But yawning quite often is a sign of stress in dogs. They also do a contagion yawn to follow us, to go along with us as well. So again, in context. Turning bodies away and turning heads away. So if somebody's approaching, sometimes a small child, in this scenario, I don't know what it was, but maybe a small child was approaching this dog, even a toddler, a baby, he's turning away, kind of saying, I don't think I want you near me. Can you kind of go away, back off? Well, also different scenarios. Shaking off is a really interesting one. If you've got more than one dog and they play, watch them afterwards. Do one or both of them shake off? Do they shake off when you have just maybe walked down the street and they have said hello to a human, and then you walk on and the dog then does a shake? Observe it. It's a reset button. It's kind of, the dog was in a little bit of stress. They kind of shake it off. It's kind of like, let's get rid of that stress. Let's release myself and move on. It's a kind of, it it's a post thing. It tells you that there was some stress, but it's not a bad thing necessarily. Dogs will actually do it when they've been in a play with another dog. So bad. So looking at those body languages of dogs, when you're down with the dogs, I want you to keep an eye on your dog, but I also want you to be aware of what's around you. We don't want to necessarily be too close to the dogs. We're going to have distance. We've got social distancing now anyway, but we are going to be at distance from the dogs in class. We're not down to play. We're down to learn. We're down to teach you and teach your dogs how to do behaviours. So we don't want to set them up for a play scenario. That's not what we're going for. So, but we are going to be doing some meetings, and I'm going to show you how to meet politely with another dog. So we will go through that. But I want you to be aware of when you're coming in, when you're getting out of your car, what's around you at that time. And awareness is often gives us the ability then to act, and whether we actually get out of that car, maybe it's better to stay in for 10 more seconds until the other dog has moved on. So that's what I mean by being aware. Dogs actually like a good bit of personal space. They don't like often to be too encroached on. Just like us humans, some humans have got huge personal spaces and they are loving social distancing because they don't want a human to be too close to them. Some humans are not. Italians, they love hugging. So let's give our dogs some space, just because we want to be on the cautious side and let them have that space. So for next week, I will be sending out some notes for after you've watched this, and I'll be sending you out some notes. But I'd like you to practice if you can. Practice does make perfect after all. So each week you're going to be learning something, and if you can practice those things between that week and the following week, great. But short sessions. Don't go for an hour. Hours is way too long for dogs. They can't concentrate that long. Short minutes, 5-minute bursts, less, even 2 minutes. Observe your dogs. That's another important. See what is normal and natural for them. So I will send out some notes, as I say, but if possible, now you can't condition the clickers because you don't have one. Some of you might, but you generally don't have one. Start to condition that yes. So what you can do there is you can throw some food on the floor, dog goes to pick it up. As the dog is picking it up, yes, the dog will more than likely then look at you because he knows where the food comes from. That's giving you attention. You can also mark that with a yes and give another piece of food for simply looking at you. So that's your first basic exercise to do between now and when you come to class. So when you do come to class, flat collars or harnesses for your dogs, a mat for your dog. Now, we're going to be on grass, so just don't be too precious about that mat. Hopefully you're not going to worry about if it's going to get a little bit dirty. Comfortable clothing for you and comfortable shoes for you. Of course, it could be cold. If it's during the middle of the day, it may be quite warm too. Treat pouch if you've got one. If you want to order one, that's great. We can do that too. Lots and lots of little treats for your dogs that you know that they're going to enjoy. Avoid feeding your dog for 4 hours before coming to class. We don't want a dog that's had a good meal and then you're going to come to class and expect it to eat more. That's just not going to really happen, is it? So I will also have some treats to buy. If you come down and you've forgotten your treats, don't panic. Don't need to go back for them. I'll have little bits of treats that you can buy. $2 only. It's just more convenient that way. So little picture here about the equipment. I will send you a list of the things and the costs of the equipment if you want to order any. If you want to leave it until you actually see them in person, then that's fine too. All right, thank you very much for choosing Canine Potential, and thank you very much for making the time to watch this recording, and I will see you in class. Bye for now.